We continue now at the top of Daf Chafam and Beis Meseches Yoma. This is Yoma Daf 20b. And the previous Summit, the Gemara brought Psukim to show that at Chatzos, at midnight, that's when you can do the mitzvah of the Trumas Hadeshin. The mitzvah of the Trumas Hadeshin is to take the ashes off of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara is now asking from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that on the Regalim, for example, you do the Trumas Hadeshin already 1/3 into the night. That's earlier even than Chatzos. So that's why the Gemara asks, Visalka daitach me Chatzos do'oraisahi. If you mean to tell me that from Chatzos, that's the do'oraisa time for the mitzvah of the Trumas Hadeshin, hechi mekadminan, how could we ever do it earlier than Chatzos? Rashi over here says, V'idoraisu hechi mekadminan garsinan, v'lo garsinan hechi macharinan. Don't have the gears of how do we do it later than Chatzos. Halo kol chetzio roy l'harama, because according to Rashi, that entire half of the night, meaning from Chatzos and onward, you can do the Trumas Hadeshin. Umal lanu im yacher, what would be the big deal to do it afterwards? In other words, Rashi saying, it doesn't have to be exactly at Chatzos, but it's got to be Chatzos or later. Hechi mekadminan afilu deshan hamuchal yafe. Even if you have a situation of the ashes, meaning the limbs have been burned properly. V'amr chetzio l'harama. You said there's a pasuk which tells us that midnight and onward is when you do the harama. Alma ein chatzi harishon kosher l'kach. You see that the first half of the night is not kosher for Trumas Hadeshin. So the Gemara answers, Elo Omer Reb Yochanan, rather Reb Yochanan says, Mimashma shenemar kol halayla. From the fact that it says it burns all night, Eini yodeya shuat haboker, don't I know that the night ends at the morning, that it's until morning? Umat hamad lomer ad haboker, so why does the pasuk say until morning? Tein boker lebokaro shalayla. It means you should add a morning to the traditional morning. And the Gemara continues, Hilkach therefore bechol yom tormenes hamizbeach bekriyas hagever. Every day you're going to do the Trumas Hadeshin when the rooster crows, or a little before or a little after, Sagi, that's going to be good enough. Where you have a concern of weakness of the Kohen Gadol, because he'll be working all day on Yom Kippur, in that case we do the Trumas Hadeshin from Chatzos. Over Regalim, and on the Regalim, the Nefishi Yisrael, where there are many Jews, when Nefishi Karbonos, and there are many Karbonos, Avdinon me'ashmoras harishona. Then we do it all the way from the beginning, or from the first watch, meaning early in the night. Rashi over here says, Elamar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo teimo chetzio lakach v'chetzio lakach. Don't say, like we said before, that half the night is designated for burning on the Mizbeach, and half the night is designated for the Trumas Hadeshin. Elohachi darish hakasav. Rather, here's how you darsh in the pasuk. Hachsher kol halayla bein lahaktara she'ein mucholin. All night is okay for Haktara if it hasn't yet been consumed, meaning the limbs have not yet been consumed by the fire. Bein laharam, and also you can do Trumas Hadeshin all night. Im yesh deshin mu'uchal, if there is ashes that have been consumed properly, meaning you have limbs that have been consumed properly, they've turned into ashes, all night is okay for Trumas Hadeshin. V'chatzos da'osa ichol be'ivarim, and chatzos, that the halacha by chatzos applies. Let's say you have a varim, shemashla b'hanaor, you have limbs where the fire has ruled over it, then we say chatzos can also create ichol. That's a separate thing. Mehacha nafka, that's learned out from the following pasuk. Mimashma shenemar b'haktara kol halayla, since the pasuk says by burning all night. Al mokta on the mizbeach, eini yodeya sharaboker karo layla. Obviously, all night means until the morning. Matam v'lomer ad boker tein hashkama acheres lebokara shalayla. What does it mean ad boker? There's another hashkama, meaning we add a morning to a morning. Bokro shalayla hu alos hashachar. The traditional morning is dawn. V'nasan lachakasa bo boker acher, and the pasuk is saying there's another morning. Lomar she'ein tzarich lahaktir min hashkama ve'elach, meaning you don't need to do it from when you wake up. V'keven shelo nasan zman ba'osa bork, we don't have an exact time. Al karchachu chatzos halayla, we move it up from dawn to chatzos. So in other words, there's an additional halacha learned from here that once chatzos comes, even if you don't have ichol, you can do Trumas Hadeshin. Hilkach therefore, hoel v'chol halayla kosher laharama. Since all night really is okay for Trumas Hadeshin, if you have limbs where you have ichol already, you don't have to wait till chatzos, you can do it all night. So kavu chachamim zmana hakol afi shah b'chol yom. So therefore the chachamim said it all depends on what's going on that particular day. B'chol yom delon afishi karbonos, meaning on all regular days where there's not so many karbonos. V'ravel hem hayom and b'kros hagever sagi. So then you have all day anyway, it's not a big deal, you can do it when the rooster crows. B'yom Kippurim di'ika chulsha de Kohen Gadol. Now on Yom Kippur, where there's weakness of the Kohen Gadol, Sharei Olav Levado hu mutal tzarich la'ashkem yoser. He's the only one doing the avodah on Yom Kippur. So then you do it a little earlier, you do it by chatzos. And then when it comes to the regalim, the nefishi karbonos, where there's a lot of karbonos, the rav hadeshin b'mokum ha'ma'arocha, and there's a lot of ashes, v'tzarich l'halos hadeshin l'tafoach la'achar ha'aroma k'ritnan b'meseches Talmud malin ha'efer l'tfoach u'tfoach u'gal shel efer. Tvoach refers to the fact that you have a whole pile of ashes. Kimin tapuach shel avonim hanidrich begas shesham konsu efer shel kol yemos hachag v'u be'emtza mizbeach. You have all of this efer from all of the holidays in the middle of the mizbeach. U'pa'amim shu'alav kegimel meos kor. Sometimes there's a lot of these ashes. Lefigach tzarach lahaktim litro me'ashmor harishona. That's why when it comes to the holidays, you can already do the Trumas Hadeshen earlier, even earlier than Chatzos, 1/3 of the way into the night. And so that's what the Gemara says again, over Regalim, the Nefishi Yisrael, and Nefishi Karbonos, on the Regalim, where there's a lot of Jews, a lot of Karbonos. Avdinan me'ashmoras rishona. Again, we do it from the first watch, 1/3 of the way into the night. Kedekatani time, as it says in the Mishnah, Lo haisa kriyas hagever magas, acha haisa azorim meleya mi Yisrael. The rooster did not crow until the Azara was full of Jews, meaning again, on the Regalim, there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of Karbonos. And the Gemara now says, "My kriyas hagever." What exactly does it mean, kriyas hagever? We translated when we did the Mishnah the rooster crowing. So Rav Omar Karagavra. Rav says it actually means the person called out. Rashi over here says, Karagavra machriz hamamuna al hakruz v'yomer imdu kohanim lavodaschem. It actually refers to a person who used to announce that the kohanim should get up to do the avoda. Kedektani bebraisa b'shmaitin, as it says in the braisa in our sugya. That's the first opinion. And the second opinion is Rav Shila Omar. Rav Shila says Karatar Nagola. It refers to, as when we translated, it refers to the rooster crowing. And the Gemara continues with a related story. Rav Iklo la'asrei Rabbi Shela. Rav went to the place of Rabbi Shela. Lohavi amora l'meika moled Rabbi Shela. And there was no disseminator to say over the shir for Rabbi Shela. They used to have a disseminator translate and say over the shir to the public. So come Rav Oleh, so Rav got up, he became the disseminator, v'kam mefarish, and he explained, my kriyas hagever. What does it mean when we say kriyas hagever? Karagavra, it means the person called out. He didn't translate it as rooster, he translated it as person. So Amar le Rabbi Shela, so Rabbi Shela said to Rav, V'leim Amar Karatar Nagola. Why didn't the master translate it as Karatar Nagola, the rooster called out? So Amar le, so Rav said back to him the following expression. Of when it comes to a flute, l'chari zemer. For somebody who's a nobleman, it sounds like music. They're sophisticated enough to appreciate it. Legardoi, but when it comes to somebody who's a weaver, lo mekablu aminei, they're not going to receive any pleasure from the flute. So too, you Rabbi Shela are not sophisticated enough to appreciate this particular translation. And Rashi over here explains who what he was saying was a mashal. Kilomar, he means to say, Peirish zeh shepeirashti lefnei sarim rabim pamim rabos. This explanation, this translation that I've given in front of many important people, v'lo michu biyadi, they never protested. Achshav now, peirashti lefanecha, I explain it to you. She'eincha gadol kamosam, you're not as great as them. V'lo kibalto, you're not accepting this translation. And the Gemara continues, Ki avokimno aled Rabbi Chia, when I, Rav, would stand before Rabbi Chia, umefarishna my kriyas hagever karagaver, and I would translate kriyas hagever as the person calling out. V'lo amar li v'lo midi, he said nothing, he didn't protest. V'yat amrit, and yet you're telling me, Ema Karatar Nagola, that I should translate it as the rooster called out. And so the story continues. Amar Lei, so Rabbi Shela said back to Rav, Mar Nihu, Rav is the master in front of me. Is it Rav? He now realizes that it's Rav that's disseminating the shir. Nei Nachmar, let the master rest. This is beneath you to be a disseminator of the shir. Amar Lei, so Rav said back to him, Amri Inshi, people say, Itagardle, once you're hired out for a job, Pots Omre, you should comb the wool, meaning once I started the task, I should complete it. Ika diamri, some have a different version. Hachi Amar Le, here's what Rav said to him. Malin bakodesh, we go up in holiness. Velomo ridin, we don't go down. Meaning it would not be appropriate for someone else who's of a lower stature than me to disseminate the shir once I began disseminating the shir. And Rashi over here says, Marhu Rav is the master Rav, meaning Shator Rogel Lokum Latargim Lefnei Rabbi Chia, Shu Dodach. Rabbi Shela realized Rabbi Chia was the uncle of Rav, and you normally disseminate the shirim of Rabbi Chia. That's how he realized that this person was Rav. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Kavase de Rav, Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Shela. We have a brisa that supports Rav, and we have a brisa that supports Rabbi Shela. Tanya Kavase de Rav, we have a brisa like Rav, Givine Cruz, Givine, who was the announcer in the Beis HaMikdash, Mahu Omer, what would he say? Imdo Kohanim lavodaschem, Kohanim, you should get up to your avoda, Uleviim leduchanchem, and Levium, you should go to your platforms. V'Yisrael l'mamadchem, and the Yisrael, you should get up for your shift in the Beis HaMikdash. V'yakolo nishma b'shalosh parsos, and you could hear his voice from 3 parsos away. Ma'isa ba'Agribas HaMelech, there was a story with Agribas HaMelech, shayabah b'derech v'shama kolo b'gimel parsos, he was on the road, and he heard the voice of this announcer from 3 parsos away. U'cheshabah l'beis, when he came to his house, shigar lo matanos, he sent him gifts, he was so impressed with his voice. And the Gemara says, V'yafal pichein, and nevertheless, Kohen Gadol meshubach mimenu. The Kohen Gadol is even more praiseworthy in terms of his voice. D'amar mar, because the Master said, Uchvar Amar Ona Hashem. He said the Ona Hashem. He said the Ona Hashem on Yom Kippur. The words Ona Hashem, v'nishma kolo b'Yericho, and you could hear the voice of the Kohen Gadol all the way in Yericho. V'yamar Rabbi Bar Barchan Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Bar Barchan is said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Yerushalayim liYericho Yud Parsi. From Yerushalayim to Yericho was 10 parsa. That's how far his voice was able to travel. V'yafagav dehacha yika chosha. And not only that, the Gemara says, even though that over here on Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol is weak, and when the announcer was making these announcements in the Beis HaMikdash, he was not weak. And still you were able to hear the Kohen Gadol from further away. And furthermore, V'hacha Yemama V'hasam Leilya. Over here, the Kohen Gadol was saying that during the daytime, it's harder for sound to travel. And the announcer who was announcing in the Beis HaMikdash, that was nighttime, and still the announcement of the Kohen Gadol traveled further. D'amar Rabbi Levi, because Rabbi Levi says, Mibnei ma ein kolo shel adam nishma b'yom kederech shenishma b'layla. Why is it that the voice of a person can't be heard as well during the day as it can be heard at night? Mibnei gal gal cham, it's because of the sound of the sun that's traveling. Shemenaser b'rakia, makes sounds in the sky. Kecheresh hamenaser ba'razim. It's like a carpenter who's cutting cedar wood. It's cutting through the sky, and it's causing sound, and that's why it's harder for other sounds to be heard during the day. And the Gemara says, V'haychirga d'yoma lo shemei. Also the Gemara says that this kind of sawdust that's in the sky, it's called law. V'hainu d'kamar Nebuchadnezzar. That's what Nebuchadnezzar meant when he said, V'chol dairei ara kilo chashivin. All of those who live on the earth, they're like law. They're like no more than sawdust in the eyes of God. They're nothing more than dust. The Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa, El Mole Galgal Chama Nishma Kol Hamona Shel Romi. If not for the sound coming from the sun, you'd be able to hear the sound coming from Rome throughout the entire world. El Mole Kol Hamona Shel Romi. And if not for the sound of Rome, Nishma Kol Galgal Chama, you'd be able to hear the sound of the sun throughout the entire world. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa, Shalosh Kolos Holchen Misofa Olam V'Yad Sofa. There are 3 sounds that can go from one side of the world to the other. Ve'eluhein, they are as follows: Kol Gal Gal Chama, the sound of the sun; V'Kol Hamona Shel Romi, the sound coming from Rome; V'Kol Neshama B'Shasha Yotzim in Aguf, and the voice and the sound of the soul at the time it is departing from the body. V'Yeshomim, and some say Af Leda, even childbirth, even that sound can be heard from one end of the earth to the other. And we'll take a look at a fefew Rashis over here. Kvar Amar Ona Hashem, the Kohen Gadol would say Ona Hashem. Kvar Pamachas Hayamaisa Shaya Kohen Gadol Misvad Al Paro B'Yom Kippurim. There was a story. The Kohen Gadol was saying his vidoy on the bull on Yom Kippur. V'Yomar Ona Hashem Chatasi V'Chulu. He said Ona Hashem. V'Nishma Kolo B'Yericho. You could hear him all the way in Yericho. V'Ikachulsha the Tanesa. Again, the Kohen Gadol is fasting. He's weak. V'Hacha Yemam, and it's the daytime. Sheina Kol Nishma Bo Kivalayla. You can't hear as much as you do during the night. And Rashi continues, V'Haychirgo Lo Shemei. This dust is called law. V'Hypsolas Hanisoris. It refers to the sawdust from cutting wood. V'Hunira Ba'amad Shalchama, can be seen in the light of the sun. The Yoma Mamish, you can see it in the daytime. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph.